Desde 1990, un holandés explora las posibilidades del movimiento a través de esculturas cinéticas que se desplazan como enormes animales sobre la arena de la playa. Su andar es armónico. Su creador, Theo Jansen.
I bring a new beast to the beach in spring, and during the summer I do all kind of experiments. So there's a lot of modification also during the summer on the beach. Sometimes they are twice as big at the end or twice as small at the end. So at the end of the summer, I declare the animal extinct. So they are dead, and they go to the boneyard. And since, well, a few years, these boneyards are adopted in exhibitions. So you can see more or less the evolutionary development of the animal, how to survive on beaches.
La creación de las denominadas bestias de playa iniciaría con el descubrimiento de un material relativamente simple y cotidiano, empleado en construcciones holandesas de manera obligatoria desde 1947.
The material is a yellowish kind of tube, which we use in Holland for electricity wires in houses. So by law, you have to use this for electricity wires. That's why it's very cheap. And kids play with it on the street, because that's how I started with blowing paper darts in open windows through this kind of tube.
Pero no solo fueron los materiales. Jansen echó mano de sus conocimientos científicos, que en mucho fueron alentados por la columna que desde 1986 publica en el periódico de circulación nacional llamado The Volkskrant.
In the beginning of the 80s already I made constructions of this kind of tube. But in the beginning of the 90s, in 1990, I was a writer. I used to write columns for a newspaper, and these columns were a bit strange perspective on scientific kind of subjects. And one of these columns was about the strand beasts. So these animals in the column would gather sand by the power of wind on beaches, and they would build dunes. And that would save the country for the future rise of the sea level. Now, that's how it started, and then this column played a big role. A half a year I didn't do anything, but then I passed this tool shop and bought some of these tubes, and I played for an afternoon with the tubes. And at the end of that afternoon, I decided to spend 1 year on the tubes.
Como todo ser que lucha para ganar un lugar en el mundo, las bestias de playa tuvieron que enfrentar el medio ambiente que querían habitar. Una especie de selección natural para un ser meramente material. Esta era ya una evolución en movimiento.
Of course, the challenges was the storms on the beach, which the animals, they blow very easy away. And the structures, they were not rigid enough. So I had to find out how to make it rigid. And then it turned out that every time I found something new, for instance, to make the joints, I found out the cable ties, the cable zip ties, then you can really strap them very strongly. And those are very, very strong.
Y aún así, Restaba una técnica capaz de conjuntar todos los elementos.
I was telling that to friends that I found the pistol, and they said, well, I could have told you immediately, but the first 3 years I did it without the pistol. So every time there was something new coming up, and still there's things coming up, which makes the technical development better.
Casi sin darse cuenta, Theo Jansen fue desarrollando con estas piezas una escala evolutiva a través de los años. Una de las primeras etapas en esta secuencia evolutiva es el denominado periodo de cinta adhesiva de celofán, material con el que Jansen unía las coyunturas de sus piezas. Sin embargo, esta unión resultó ser muy débil y Jansen comenzó a emplear alambre para unir las partes. Desde luego que doblar los tubos también demandó cierta pericia técnica.
The heat gun, so the hot period came, and after the hot period, then you get a period that the less hot period, because the temperature of the heat gun was too high, and you don't notice it, but after a year, these joints become very brittle. So that's why I needed to put down the temperature of the heat gun.
Después, vendría un periodo en el que los tubos cederían su lugar a otros materiales como el metal y el papel, bestias monumentales.
I was not too faithful to the tubes, so I wanted to make real big animals in steel and in wood. So here you see a few models. Here's one in aluminum, and there you see one in paper. And that ended up in an animal which was almost 5 meters high as the ceiling here, and it was more than 3.2 tons. And it was from steel, and you could sit in there. And we tried it out on a runway of an airport, and it was driven by the wind, and it went very well.
Theo Jansen nació en Scheveningen en 1948. Su primera vocación fue el campo de la física aplicada.
Well, I used to study physics when I was young, but I must say I was not a very good student, a bit lazy maybe. And so I studied 7 years in Delft, the University of Delft, and then I decided to become a painter. So I painted for many years. When I started to study, I really had a career in front of me that I would end up like all the students there who studied physics, that I would be an engineer working for Philips or whatever. That was the road in front of me. But I landed in this university city in a certain time. It was the hippie time. So people did all kinds of things which they were not supposed to do. And I came in a group of people who really had a large inspiration, a large influence on me. So being a farmer's boy, coming into the university, they changed me. And they showed me that a lot of other possibilities were possible in life.
Pero no sería hasta los años 80 del siglo XX que Theo Jansen adquiriría reconocimiento, esta vez no debido a sus esculturas cinéticas, sino más bien a un objeto volador no identificado.
And in the beginning of the 80s, I got this idea of building a flying saucer which could really fly. And I launched this over my town in Delft, and everybody believed that it was a real flying saucer. And that made me famous for a few months in my country, because it was on television, it was a lot of excitement. And then I was not able to paint anymore because I have tasted a larger audience. And then I wrote this column, and then the Strand Beast came.
Fue el ovni, pero sobre todo sus bestias, las que han nutrido la imaginación de Theo Jansen. Imaginación que ha plasmado en varios libros y en una filosofía que va más allá de la mecánica.
It's not really based on intelligence. It's more based on a naive person who doesn't hesitate to do something impossible. And so maybe I'm an optimist without reason, a rational optimist. At the moment that I was working on it, I was naive enough to believe that it would become something. And so I think you need to be not too much of an engineer who is rational, or no, you have to follow your dream, I guess, and that's what a poet does as well. I think a poet, he uses his imagination as if it's really happening for you. In fact, and I saw it all happening. So at the moment that I was creating it, I saw this really happening, while there were not too many facts supporting this dream.
En la misma idea que el poeta francés Gaston Bachelard, quien afirmaba que la primera tarea del poeta es desanclar en nosotros una materia que quiere soñar, la alquimia de Jansen funde el movimiento con la playa, con la arena, el viento, el horizonte y los sueños. Y es muy probablemente ese influjo de vida en movimiento el que invariablemente nos hace pensar primero en animales cuando vemos estos dispositivos y no en robots. Por ello, Jansen no se compara con los ingenieros en robótica.
There's a big difference between these engineers on universities and me, because the first thing which is very obvious, that I restrict myself very much in the choice of my materials. I just use this kind of tube, and I want to do everything with that kind of tube. So I have to follow the rules of the tube, you could say. But thinking of this restriction, you think that a restriction would limit yourself and your possibilities. But for me, it turns to be the other way around, because when I have an idea and I want to realize that idea with the tubes, I usually fail to realize those ideas, because the tubes, they want something else. They protest against my ideas. So the next day, I wake up with a new idea, which is based on the experience with the tubes. So the path which I'm walking is not straight from A to B, but it's very curly and very capricious and unpredictable, because I'm dictated by the tubes. And it turns out that the ideas of the tubes turn out to be a lot better than my ideas. And because I don't know how it works, but at the end, when the animal's finished, I'm surprised myself how beautiful they became. And it's not because I tried to make something beautiful, but it's because I followed the rules of the tubes. But an engineer, he works very different. He has an idea, and then he goes to realize his idea. So he puts all the drawers, takes everything he needs, he buys everything he needs, and then he realizes his idea. And probably it works a lot better than my animals. But it's it's based only on their idea and not on the ideas of the stuff they're working with. So I think it's a totally different conception.
No obstante, la creación de Jansen no se aparta de recursos matemáticos como la generación de algoritmos y programas de computadora, pero también de genética.
Well, there are no theories which will change the world, I'm afraid, but it are theories which make people think. For instance, this beast which is standing there in the corner, it's the Animalis geneticus. It has a sort of genetic code, because you could see the leg system. It consists of 13 tubes, and these tubes need to have a certain proportion of length, so there are 13 numbers, you could say. But a whole animal like that has 375 tubes, and they all have a certain length, and the length of each tube you could see as a part of the genetic code. I think it's because in the computer program which I wrote, there were some mechanical issues in there which might be the same mechanical issues which our real animals have while walking. So seeing the animal walk, it is as if you see a real animal walking.
Adaptación morfológica es un concepto en biología que define la capacidad de los animales para realizar cambios en su estructura externa, para mimetizarse en formas y colores con su medio ambiente y adaptarse mejor a este.
The Animalis geneticus, you could replace a tube by another, a shorter or a longer tube. If you would replace it by all tubes which are twice as long, you get a very big animal, but it will be very shaky. And if you do it twice as small, you get a very small one, which will be very stiff. So the length of the animal, the length of the tubes, they determine the quality of the beast.
Pero no todas las bestias son exitosas. A manera de selección natural como en la biología, Theo Jansen aprende y mejora en cada pieza.
I built a herd of Animalis geneticus, and they all were slightly different. And then there were running matches on the beach, and you could see which animal runs the most fast. And from the winners, you could copy the genetic code in the losers, and then you have a real evolution. And that's well, those kind of reflections. I wrote a thick book about this, all the thoughts which came to me in that period of time that I was working with this beast.
Theo Jansen reconoce en su creación una espontaneidad, tanto al momento de la creación de sus piezas, como en la interacción que el público tiene con ellas.
Of course, the emotions of myself. I mean, imagine that you're building something and you're surprised, my God, this is alive. How did I do that? I don't know how I did that. Somehow it came. I think that it is because I followed the rules of the tube, that the tubes told me what to do, and they got their shape and their movement. So, but of course, this also to other people, it seems to have the same effect. If you see people pushing, especially kids, if you see the movement, people start smiling somehow.
Pero además de kinético, el vínculo que se establece con estas bestias es, primeramente, de índole visual, al reconocer el movimiento. Pero es precisamente ese movimiento en la playa el que también avanza a los terrenos de nuestra imaginación.
Our retina is very sensitive for animals. I mean, an animal in the past, it could mean something to run away for, or to something to eat. And so we immediately recognize that movement, but somehow we see just a bunch of tubes. And this contrast, or this description turns over a switch in people's brains.
Y es en la mirada donde Jansen reconoce un fundamento evolutivo del ser humano en todos los lugares que ha visitado con sus bestias.
I recognize it every time I look at the face. Yeah, that's the effect. And so I think it's because we're all afraid of animals, and then we say, oh, there's an animal coming. Oh no, it's just a bunch of tubes. So that's, I think, the reaction of people. And that's every time this happens, universal. So you see it in Japan, you see it in all the world, because we're all related, we're all family of each other, so our retinas are quite similar.
En algún momento de la evolución, los animales también comenzaron a modificar su entorno. Es ahí precisamente donde las playas de Holanda dialogan con las bestias.
Well, I started off with the dune building beasts, and after a while I got so much more interested in evolutionary theory that I forgot all about the building the dunes, but it came back this summer. So there's a structure on the beach now, and usually when you have a structure on the beach, the wind always brings sand, and if you do nothing, after the summer, the whole thing is buried in sand. So now they have a structure on the beach which, indeed, there's sand on it, but every time it lifts itself a little bit up. So in the end, there will be a dune with a beast on top, and then it will go to another place and it will build dunes again.
Evolución, imaginación, vida y movimiento parecen ser los elementos de los que Theo Jansen se vale para crear, para dar vida a estas estructuras.
Well, somehow these animals, they radiate peace or love or something nice, and that, I think, well, I don't know how this came, but it's somehow when I'm working on this beach and I see it as a big miracle that we exist, and somehow this because I'm building this, that these animals maybe radiate this miracle, that once we realize we are living in a miracle, then we become alive, because life without imagination is nothing. I mean, you really need something to believe in, a fairy tale, whatever. You need your imagination, because we humans are so good to imagine things, and that's part of our nature. And so using our imagination, then we come alive.